Yo, what's shaking, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of the Orange Bloods Texas Football Channel. I'm Geoff Ketchum. That is Anwar Richardson. Do us a solid, like the video, subscribe to the channel, do all of those things, notifications, comment in the comments section, tell your friends. We like it when you get interactive and help us out here on the channel. Today, we're talking about the Texas pass rush, the Texas defensive line, if you will. On Monday, Steve Sarkisian met with the media. One of the questions that I believe Anwar asked
Yeah.
Sarkisian was about the Texas pass rush and kind of the lay of the land and where things stand going into the second week in camp. And Anwar, when asked the question about the pass rush and about the development of the defensive line, Sarkisian said a mouthful.
Yeah. So he
Like the biggest
started.
paragraph. When you posted that on Orange Bloods, it was like the biggest paragraph I've ever seen in my entire life.
It was the biggest paragraph, and yet it's got several thousand views. So it took me a few years to learn Orange Bloods and learn what people like and don't like, and I've learned a lot of times. Less is more when it comes to our fans, and they know on your column is fine to a certain degree. My column 321, but other than that, like I don't want like 25 inches of stuff. So he starts off when I asked him about the pass rush, because obviously last week I asked Pete Krakowski Ketch about the pass rush, and his immediate response was, "What pass rush?" So I didn't want to throw Pete K under the bus and say, your DC last week said what pass rush. So I was like, all right, I don't, because I mean, barely lets us talk to his guys anyway. I don't want him to shut it down permanently, so we don't get him once a year. So I just asked him basically about the pass rush itself. And he started with how, he started, I'm going to run out off a bunch of names. And he started with Keandre Coburn. And he said, I feel him rushing the passer, which was something we wanted him to do. Didn't want him to be a one-dimensional player, that he's got that ability to rush the passer. And it's interesting that he started with Keandre, because I think when we think of Keandre, we think run stopper, maybe a guy that takes up two defenders, that kind of thing is what we think about. We don't necessarily think about him getting after the quarterback. And to be fair, we never think about the defensive line. Many of these guys are getting after the quarterback because we just didn't see that last season. So he started with Keandre. I'll step back and allow you to talk from there, because I'm sure you have your reactions, as relates to from that starting point.
Well, I kind of vomited in my mouth when I heard and read the full answer on kind of the state of the pass rush. I just don't think it's there right now. I think that, with all due respect to Keandre Coburn, we talked about this yesterday on our Overreaction Monday show. I think Keandre Coburn's got a chance to play on Sundays and be a guy that earns his pension in the league. He's a big body. I think he's got value. But as I heard Sarkisian answer the question, he wasn't centering on the players that I think, in my mind, will determine ultimately how good this pass rush is. Ovi Ogofu wasn't at the center of his comments yesterday, and I kind of feel like Ovi's a critical player in the rush that they want to get. He didn't say that Baron Sorrell was a guy that they think has a chance to be a double-digit sacks. I mean, and maybe that's just because those guys don't exist in that capacity. But he said a lot of names and he said a lot of words. And I think he said a lot of names and he said a lot of words because that continues to be an area of the team that they don't have true answers for at this point. And it did make me think back to the answer that Kwiatkowski made a week ago, where at one point he says, we just, you'd like to have better players if at all possible. They have kind of the same group of players that they had a year ago, a group that underperformed in this area. And my confidence level that they have the same players are now ready to turn in the type of pass rush that this defense needs is pretty low, if I'm being completely honest. I don't know what to expect, but my expectations aren't sky high.
I mean, I'm looking it up now, Ketchum. This is a team that, according to the University of Texas website, registered 20 sacks last season. When you start looking at, and again, there's it's quarterback hurries as well. So if you go quarterback hurries, that would be 24. But what is that averaging to? Like what is that, like twice a game? Is what that's going to pretty much come to.
And it's less than
Um,
2 sacks per game and right at 2 pressures per game.
yeah, that's a lot of time for guys to operate, catch. And when I'm looking at the stats right now, and I'm going through, Ray Thornton had 1 sack last season. Alfred Collins had 2 sacks. Tavondre Sweat had 1 sack. Keandre had 1 sack. Byron Murphy had 2. I'm just trying to go down the list. Vernon Broughton had half of a sack.
It's not good.
Yeah, I mean, yes. I mean, we all know Ben Davis led the team, with 2.5. So, so when you start asking yourself, okay, well, what's a realistic turnaround when 2 is the highest number that any individual had in the room? So are you saying that this is going to jump from 2 to 8? Are you saying 1 is going to 1 sack is going to go from 1 to 5? Like, what is the realistic number? How that's going to operate? And look, there was a talk, obviously, with Sarkisian as far as the switching and the safeties. Try to play tighter coverage, hoping by playing tighter coverage that maybe gives some more time to get to the quarterback. But to your point, Ketchum, with your face, that comes risk as well. That becomes risk as well, because if you're at 6 Mississippi and that pass rush hasn't gotten there, I mean, I don't give a damn how tight your coverage is. Guys can't run around that long. That's a problematic. So, I think it's a wait and see approach. It remains to be seen. I think PK, to your point, brought up something I thought was really valuable when he says that you just wish you had better players. I don't think he was trying to throw anyone under the bus, but I think he was talking about, like, the reality is may not have the dogs, and they may be having to wait to some of these young guys to develop. They talked about, last thing I'll say, I'll let you jump back in. He talked about the guys that they see flashes from, like, Jere Bledsoe, Zach Swanson, Chris Ross, Aaron Bryant. Did not mention our Westlake kid. So he's just kind of in development, but still, it may be about the future and just doing the best that you can with what you have currently.
Yeah, I think the hope with the freshman class realistically was that Justice Finkley or Jamon Tapp might come in, and if you could get one of those 2 guys, because neither of those guys were 5-star or high 4-star prospects, that were slightly below that, and that doesn't mean they're not good prospects or good players, but it's hard to expect someone who's not quite at a super blue chip level to come in and from day one just tear things up and put yourself in the mix as a definitive X factor. Up until now, we're kind of seeing that play out on the field. Finkley was here in the spring and is, I think is a guy they feel really good about for the future, but this season being an X factor may be too much to ask for. Tapp has only been on campus a couple of months. He's not yet. And look, we're only a week into practice, and the pads are just now getting ready to come on. So there's a lot of room in this camp for those guys to make moves. But at this point, if the Longhorns are going to get real improvement, I think in the pass rush up front, it's going to be from the players that are returning. And it's hard to know what to make of that. I know one of the questions I was going to ask you is whether or not you feel like there's a guy. Would you bet a mortgage payment on one of these players on the Texas defense having 5 or more sacks this season?
No.
Yeah.
I got to pay my mortgage. I'm not.
Your money, not my money.
Yeah. No, I gotta pay. No, I'm not gonna do that, Catch. But let me ask you a question. Sarkisian seems to be pretty intentional in his media interviews, and last week, I think Brian Davis asked him something. He said that's not a good question. So he seems to be in tune to this stuff. He's specific, and there's been times where we've heard him being interviewed, and he won't mention anybody's name, any player's name. He just goes general. But yesterday on Monday, he mentioned Alfred Collins and Tavondre Sweat, and it was a little bit of a call out, not an insult, but a little bit of a call out that says, I want to see more from those guys. Like, I want to see more consistency from those two guys specifically. So he went down the list of, he thought Byron Murphy was playing well. He thought Vernon Broughton was playing well. But then he talked about, because he hasn't really mentioned Catch. I don't know if he's mentioned any other position group where he's talked about two guys specifically. So is it possible that he sees something in Sweat and Collins, and he's just trying to figure out how to push the right buttons so they do this day in and day out? And maybe he was hoping that the call out kind of lights a little fire under their ass, like, oh, this is how coach feels. This is what to do. I'm curious what you thought about the call out.
I think it makes a lot of sense. I think, he mentioned Vernon Broughton's name yesterday, and a lot of people got excited because it was like, oh my God, we've been waiting for Vernon Broughton's name to be mentioned, and it's finally happened. Maybe that means the light switch came on. I took that a little bit as he's telling us there are players he wants more from, and I think in complimenting some of the other guys, the hope would be that Alfred Collins would be a guy you'd hope, more so than Tavondre Sweat. If I'm asking you who you'd put your money on to get 5 sacks this season, I think Collins is a guy that you'd like to be part of that answer, that he has seemingly the NFL level talent at his very best. He's a guy that should be able to play at that level, but it's clear the coaches don't think that happens every day. It's clear that based on the fact that he comes into camp as the number one guy at his position, and 5 days in, he's working a lot with the second team right now. The messaging with Collins is going to be consistent moving forward. Dude, play better and play better every day. We know Sark hates this.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't want up and down. He doesn't want today for Collins to show up and look all world. And then it's like, okay, maybe we've turned a corner. And then the next day, he gives you nothing to the point where you're like, well, maybe he doesn't need to be running with the first team. I think that a big part of yesterday was you can't yell fire. You can't have panic on the team before pads even come on. Is the pass rush what they want? No. Is the pass rush where they probably want it? No. But I think they want to project confidence. I think they want to project they've got volume and players. So maybe they don't have a guy that can get them 5, but maybe if you add them all up, you've got a bunch of guys that can get you 2 and 3, and you're just going to constantly be rotating, and you want to hang a carrot in front of all of these guys and let them know it's there for you, dog. Like, there's nobody who's entrenched as the guy anywhere.
Yeah.
So I think that in mentioning basically every name, he's letting all of these guys know, put your foot on the gas and get there, because this isn't Tyreek Milton trying to take snaps away from Jordan Whittington, right? I mean, this isn't Roshan with Bijan. And it's like, well, if you want to average 10 carries a game, just show us more. That's not what we're seeing at other positions specifically. But here, there's nobody that is so good that no matter how you perform, you're not going to get on the field a ton. So it's all there for the taking. And that answer for me yesterday, not just for Collins, who I think it was largely pointed at. I think for every guy there, he's trying to incentivize them and say, come on, big fellas, you give us a little bit more and you're going to be the guy that we count on to help us get there. I guess the question that I would turn around and ask you as a follow up to the one I asked before was if you took my money, it was like $1,000 in Vegas,
Mm-hmm.
and you had to put $1,000 in Vegas on someone in
Mm.
this group getting 5+ sacks, who would you spend? Who would you put my $1,000 on?
That's a fantastic one. I probably would put the money on Collins. I think I would go. I would go with that. Your
Who's in
money.
the doghouse at least a little bit right
Yeah,
now?
yeah, yeah. I would go with, but you know what? His upside is so high, Catch, and that's the thing about. And I'm sure that has to be frustrating. Because it's been frustrating for us as fan club presidents or fan club members, because there's been two guys, and one guy's finally started to turn the corner that I think we were head scratching about because we thought from the time we saw them all world potential, right? Jatavian Sanders, Alfred Collins. I think both of those two guys, we were like bona fide. These guys are they're going to come in here and they're going to do the damn thing. And we were waiting on Jatavian. And to your point, you went back to it. What did Sark say? Just wasn't consistent enough. And then when they kind of called him out, remember, Ketch, he talked about, hey, they kind of called him out in practice. Then all of a sudden there was like 10 straight practices where he just balled out, didn't drop a pass, anything like that. And they love that consistency from there on out. And I think that's happens. I think there's no coincidence in life. I think there was a call out, and he said, "Look, we talked to them behind closed doors, so there's a respect level that goes into that. That's not the first time these guys have heard it." Alfred Collins and Sweat, I think those are the guys he feels like they have the upside because he mentioned Morrow, but it was like late, like it was like one of the last guys that he mentioned. So and his explanation for Morrow kind of left me lost just kind of a little bit because he goes, there's Morrow kind of working himself back into it now. It's getting him back to that level of player that we think he's capable of being. And I'm not quite sure what you're saying. Morrow was working. Where does he work himself in from that discipline for opening his mouth in the spring? Like I can't.
His legs are still tired from what his mouth created for him.
For all the running he's doing in DKR. I would put it on Alfred. Alfred's the other guy that we look at and say, man, if he could put this together, that guy's a beast. That guy is, that's a draft pick if he's able to put this thing together. So I'd put it on Alfred. Who would you put? You took my 1,000. So this is a fair exchange. Who would you put my 1,000 on?
I might still go Ovi. I don't think Ovi has 10 sack upside.
Mm-hmm.
But 5 sack upside if he's given all of Ray Thornton's reps. And he won't because they may break those down amongst numerous players this year. But I think he would be scheduled to get the lion's share of those reps. I think Ovi's going to get himself 3.5. It's not a big jump to think that he could get to 5. But I don't think he has 5 sacks in his career at this point. If you add up what he's done at Notre Dame and Texas together, Ovi's a former Orange Bloods athlete. We had him here on the channel all of last year. We really like him as a human being. I think we like him as a leader. Certainly the coaches like him as a leader on this defense. The question is, can he raise his upside from pretty good to very good? Not great. Not elite. That's not what we're talking about. There are levels to this. He's got to be better than average because average is how you get below 3 sacks. Well, how did Ovi do? Well, we had a couple of sacks over the season. Just a guy. Can he be better than just a guy? I think the answer to that is yes. How much better, though, can he be than that? And I don't know. I would love to be hearing in practice constantly that Ovi is the guy that this team can't block. And that wasn't what came out of Sark's mouth yesterday was an indication to me, okay, well, that's just not happening. his number one edge guy right now is Ovie Ogofu. And when asked about the pass rush, he talked about Keandre Coburn. Again, we say this all the time. Sometimes it's not what you say, it's what you didn't say. And that's what I took out of that answer yesterday was a lot more about what he did. He said there was a big old jumbo word salad that came out of Sark's mouth about the question. And he mentioned almost everybody's name, but it was what he didn't say inside of that word salad that made me go, uh-oh. I would still put it on Ovie Ogofu, but I don't know how likely that is. And that's another way of saying I don't know how likely. 5's an arbitrary number. I mean, it's not like getting 5 sacks means anything. It's not like, oh, well, damn, that guy's all big. Like we usually think of double-digit sacks as like this guy's a total badass as a pass rusher. We're cutting that in half, and we're just asking if a couple of these guys can be better than Jags as pass rushers. And I don't know.
Yeah, but we're soon to be find out again. If we're talking about the high being 2, you're asking some guys to double it, with that output from last season, and some guys to triple it, depending on what they did or didn't do. So, it's an interesting thing, And the other thing, Catch, that last thing I'll say, is interesting observation. Last year around this time, we were hearing a lot of, that defensive line is beating up on that offensive line. Like it's not even fair how that defense is doing. We aren't hearing that right now. And we'll see how this week progresses with the pads coming on. But we haven't been hearing a lot of those guys. Now, maybe we shouldn't listen to it, even if we do hear it this year, Catch, and maybe we should just put our fingers in our ear and say we're not going to fall for the banana in the tailpipe again. But the fact that we haven't heard of anything from that standpoint either means the offensive line is not as bad as they were last year, or the defensive lineman needs to step up. There's probably somewhere in between is probably where that whole thing needs to be met.
I think it's a question, and I think you need to ask that same question to Sark next week. And I'm curious now when the pads come on, how does that answer change, if any at all? He has my curiosity with where he might take it, and at this point, we don't really know. Like it hasn't happened yet, but once the pads come on, how different does the answer sound? It'll be one of the things that we'll be talking about here on the channel. It'll be one of the things that dominates the conversation for this team going into the season. Do us a solid. I'd love to know your answers. I'm talking to the viewer right now. Who do you think can get to 5 sacks? You take my $1,000, you take Anwar's $1,000, and you put it on a name in Vegas. I'm curious to where the faith belongs right now for Texas fans as it relates to the pass rush. Leave your comments in the comments section. Do us a solid. Like the video. Subscribe to the channel. Ring that bell. Smash that bell right now. Get notifications. And just know we'll have videos throughout the rest of the week. Modcast on Thursday. Drunk Uncle Wednesday night. I believe by the time this video airs, I will have had the Tuesday night OB at Night show that you can go back and watch. Lots of content all week long leading up to the season opener against Louisiana Monroe. But for now, myself and Anwar Richardson will bid you farewell. You guys take care of each other. We'll talk to you soon. Later.